My name is Margaret Holland. I was 23 years old when I volunteered with the American Red Cross in 1917. They needed nurses, they said. They needed women who weren't afraid of hard work. I'd been nursing for 2 years at Massachusetts General Hospital, thought I'd seen everything. Appendicitis, pneumonia, complicated births. I was young and capable, and I wanted to serve. I had no idea what I was volunteering for. They sent us over on a transport ship in early 1918. We arrived in France in March, just as the Germans launched their spring offensive. We were assigned to a field hospital near Chateau Thierry, close enough to the front that we could hear the guns, always the guns. That sound becomes part of you, like your own heartbeat. The other girls and I, we were excited at first. Can you imagine? Excited. We thought we'd be heroes, angels of mercy, saving brave soldiers. We'd read the recruitment posters, seen the photographs of smiling nurses with grateful patience, clean white uniforms, and noble sacrifice. The reality was different. The hospital was a converted warehouse, drafty and dim, with rows and rows of cots. The smell hit you first, carbolic acid trying and failing to cover up gangrene, blood, excrement, death. You never got used to it. Every breath tasted like it. But I could handle the physical wounds, the shattered limbs, the gas burns, the infections. Those I was trained for. What I wasn't trained for were the silent ones. They started coming in after the major battles. Belleau Wood, the Argonne young men, most of them younger than me, with no visible wounds, no blood, no bandages. Some were shaking. Some sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. They didn't speak. I remember the first one clearly. Private James Hartley from Ohio, 20 years old, farm boy, bright blue eyes. His medical tag said shell shock, but that didn't prepare me for what I saw. He was sitting on his cot, knees pulled up to his chest, rocking slightly. His eyes were open but empty, hollow. "Private Hartley?" I said gently. "I'm Nurse Holland. Can you tell me where it hurts?" Nothing, not even a blink. I touched his shoulder and he flinched so violently he fell off the cot, scrambled into the corner like a terrified animal, started making this sound, this high-pitched keening that wasn't quite a scream. His hands were over his ears, pressing so hard I thought he'd hurt himself. Dr. Morrison came running. "Shell shock case," he said, like that explained everything. "Probably won't speak for weeks. If ever. If ever." That's when I started to understand. These boys weren't physically wounded. They were broken in a different way, a way I couldn't see or touch or bandage. They'd seen something out there in those trenches that had stolen their voices, stolen their ability to be human. By April, we had an entire ward of them, 30 beds full of silent, shaking boys who'd stopped being boys somewhere in the mud of France. You learn things when you work with the silent ones. You learn to read their eyes, their hands, the way they breathe. You learn that silence isn't always the same. Some were catatonic. They'd sit for hours without moving, barely blinking, barely breathing. You had to feed them by hand like infants. Corporal Michael Chen from San Francisco was like that. He'd gotten stuck in a crater during a bombardment, trapped there for 3 days with the bodies of his unit. When they finally dug him out, he'd stopped speaking, stopped everything, really. His eyes looked dead. Others were different. Private David Kowalski from Detroit would sit on his bed and mime things, over and over, the same movements, loading a rifle, throwing a grenade, ducking, screaming silently. Then he'd do it again and again, sometimes for hours. His hands were always moving, fighting a battle only he could see. The worst were the ones who tried to speak but couldn't. Lieutenant Robert Shaw from Boston, college-educated, officer material, they said. He'd open his mouth and nothing would come out except this desperate gasping like he was drowning on dry land, tears streaming down his face from the effort, the frustration. He'd write notes sometimes. Make it stop was the most common one. I couldn't make it stop. None of us could. We tried everything: warm baths, music, quiet rooms. The psychiatrists would visit, the ones who specialized in war neurosis, they called it now. They'd talk about trauma and dissociation and nervous exhaustion, big words for something they didn't really understand. I'd hold their hands during the nightmares, because they all had nightmares, even the ones who seemed asleep, especially those ones. They'd thrash and fight invisible enemies, making those terrible silent screams. Private Hartley would claw at his face until I had to restrain his hands. Others would weep soundlessly, their whole bodies shaking with sobs you couldn't hear. One night, a boy named Thomas Freeman from Georgia woke up screaming, actually screaming. We thought it was progress until we realized he was screaming one word over and over: burning. Burning, burning. He'd seen a flamethrower attack, watched his friends burn alive in their trench. They had to sedate him. When he woke up, he was silent again, never spoke another word that I know of. Months passed. The war ended in November 1918. We heard celebrations in Paris, church bells ringing. The other nurses cried with relief and joy. The silent ones didn't react at all, because for them, the war hadn't ended. It was still happening, every minute of every day, playing on repeat inside their heads. Private Kowalski kept mining his battle. Lieutenant Shaw kept trying desperately to speak. Corporal Chen kept staring at things we couldn't see. The Army wanted to send them home, said their families could care for them. I wanted to laugh at that or cry. What were their families supposed to do? How do you care for someone who's locked inside themselves, who can't tell you what they need, who flinches at every loud noise and can't sleep without screaming? I wrote letters sometimes to their mothers and wives, tried to explain. Your son is physically well, but has been affected by his experiences. Such inadequate words. How do you tell a mother that her boy isn't coming home? Not really. That the person they're sending back looks like her son, but has had something vital scooped out of him? Some families wrote back, grateful, hopeful. We'll take care of him. We'll help him heal. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Others were angry. There's nothing wrong with him. He just needs to toughen up. Stop being a coward. Those letters made me furious. Coward. These boys had stood in trenches while the world exploded around them. They'd watched their friends die in ways that would make you vomit if I described them. They'd kept fighting even as their minds broke under the weight of it all. That's not cowardice. That's the opposite of cowardice. We started shipping them out, back to America, to veterans' hospitals and asylums. I said goodbye to Private Hartley in January 1919. He still hadn't spoken. His mother came to get him, a small woman with his same blue eyes. She hugged him and he let her, but there was no recognition in his face, no emotion. He'll get better at home, she told me, desperate. Won't you, Jamie? I couldn't tell her the truth, that I'd seen hundreds of these cases now and only a handful had improved, that most would spend the rest of their lives silent or institutionalized or dead by their own hand, so I lied. I hope so, ma'am. I truly do. My breaking point came in February 1919. A boy named Andrew Sullivan from New York, 19 years old. He'd been with us for 3 months, completely mute, barely responsive. Then one morning I came in from my shift and found him sitting up in bed, looking almost normal. "Good morning, Private Sullivan," I said, not expecting a response. "Good morning, Nurse Holland," he said back. I nearly dropped my tray. His voice was rough from disuse, but it was there. He was speaking. I called for Dr. Morrison immediately. We gathered around his bed like he was a miracle. "How are you feeling?" the doctor asked. "Better, sir. I think I'm ready to go home." We were so happy. Finally, proof that they could heal, that the silence wasn't permanent. We processed his discharge papers, sent a telegram to his family. He even smiled a little when we told him he'd be leaving in 2 days. I found him the next morning. He'd taken apart his bed frame somehow, used a sharp piece of metal, slit his wrists and throat. There was a note, the only thing he'd written in 3 months. I can hear them again. I can hear them screaming. I don't want to hear them anymore. He'd survived the trenches, survived the shells and the bullets and the gas, survived 3 months of silent hell in our hospital. And then, when he started to come back, when the wall in his mind cracked open, everything came flooding through and it was too much. The silence had been protecting him. I stopped going to work for a week after that. Just couldn't. Couldn't face the others, knowing that getting better might kill them. Couldn't stand the hope in the doctor's eyes when someone showed signs of improvement. Couldn't bear the weight of all that broken silence pressing down on me. But I went back because someone had to take care of them. I came home to Boston in June 1919. My family threw me a welcome party. Everyone wanted to hear about my experiences, about the brave soldiers I'd nursed. They expected stories of gratitude and recovery, of men healed and sent home whole. I couldn't tell them the truth. Still can't, not really. It's been 33 years now. I'm 56 years old. I continued nursing, worked at several veterans' hospitals. I've spent over 3 decades caring for men the war broke in ways that don't heal. Some of the silent ones did speak again, eventually. A word here and there, brief sentences, but most remained locked inside themselves. I'd see them in the veterans' wards, old men now, still fighting battles that ended before they turned 25, still mute, still shaking, still staring at horrors only they can see. Private Hartley, I found out later, lived with his mother until 1928, never spoke again, never worked, never married, died in an institution at age 32. Official cause was pneumonia. Unofficial cause was the war that never ended inside his head. Corporal Chen went home to his family in San Francisco. His sister wrote to me once. He sat in a chair by the window every day for 20 years, saying nothing, barely moving. Died in 1938. His family said it was a blessing. Lieutenant Shaw, the one who tried so hard to speak, did eventually get some words back. But he could never talk about the war. His throat would close up. His whole body would start shaking. He became a recluse, lived alone. Last I heard, he was still alive, 70 years old, still silent about the things that matter most. People ask me sometimes what was the worst part of the war. They expect me to say the blood, the death, the amputations. But it wasn't that. The worst part was watching young men lose themselves, watching their personalities, their souls, their very voices get swallowed by something so terrible it couldn't be spoken. The worst part was knowing we sent them there. We put them in those trenches, subjected them to industrialized horror that the human mind isn't built to process, then acted surprised when they broke. We called them heroes as we loaded them onto ships, called them shell-shocked, neurasthenic, hysterical when they came back silent. We called them everything except what they were, victims. I think about Private Sullivan's notes sometimes. I can hear them screaming. That's what silence was for some of them, a refuge from the memories. When the silence broke, the memories came back, and some couldn't survive it. The war ended in 1918. But for the silent ones, for their families, for those of us who cared for them, it never really ended at all. We're all still living in its shadow, still listening for screams we can't hear, still trying to reach boys who left part of themselves in the mud of France and never got it back. They told us we'd be heroes, angels of mercy. What they didn't tell us was that some wounds can't be healed, that some silences are louder than screams, that sometimes survival is its own kind of death. I did my duty. I cared for them the best I could, but I couldn't save them. No one could. The war took their voices, and most of them never got them back, And we, everyone who sent them there, everyone who watched them break, everyone who couldn't fix them, we have to live with that. Those boys didn't die in France, but they didn't come home either. They're still there in that space between living and dying, speaking in silence, still fighting, still falling, still lost. And 33 years later, I can still hear them. Not their voices, they had no voices, but their silence, that terrible, crushing silence that speaks louder than any scream. I hear it every night before I sleep. I'll hear it until I die. We broke them, and they stayed broken. That's the truth no one wants to hear. But someone needs to say it. Someone needs to remember the men who never spoke again.